So let's start with Plato's Cave. The quote that this pulls from is, "Maybe the books can get us half out of the cave." Now that is an actual reference to Plato's allegory of the cave. And if you're unfamiliar with Plato's allegory of the cave, it's a story where a group of people have been chained and they're only allowed to face one side of the cave. And so this is all they have seen their entire life. And there are people behind them that are holding up objects that cast shadows on the wall, where the only reality that these people know are the shadows on the wall. And so they get very good at naming the shadows on the wall. So good, in fact, they consider themselves to be experts on what it is that they see. But this is their only reality. They don't see any of this. Well, the story goes that one of them was able to break free and actually go outside into the light of reality. And when that happened, they're completely overwhelmed and they understand the world in an entirely new way. But they come back and they try to tell the other ones, and the other ones don't believe them. In fact, they think that the one who has been enlightened, notice that light is a big part of this, the one that's been enlightened is actually insane. That's supposed to be the representation of Guy Montag. So when we think about the idea of what we know to be true and what we know to be reality and what we know to be an expert in something, whether that's language or history, all of those things could simply be shadows on the wall. So when we talk about Fahrenheit 451, notice that they say maybe. Maybe the books can get us half out of the cave, not all the way out of the cave, but half out of the cave. Because one of the big mistakes that people make about Fahrenheit 451 is the assumption that it's all about books, but it's actually not all about books. It's much more about ideas and language. And that actually goes to a picture that's down there, which is Heraclitus's stream. It's not about the books. It's some of the things that once were in the books. It means the ideas. We have to allow for ideas to constantly change in order for us to have some grasp on what it is to be enlightened. So why is light so important when we talk about this? This candle is supposed to represent Descartes. So whenever a kid chooses it, we talk about Descartes. Remember, Descartes was the guy who said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. The reason that he said that is that he was trying to combat the idea of skepticism. He was questioning everything around him to see whether or not it was even real, right? Going back to Plato's allegory of the cave, whether we are just naming shadows on the wall or we have gotten past the deception and into reality itself. So how do we know what is actually real? How? We do the hard work of thinking. We do the difficult, uncomfortable work of thinking. We live, as Socrates said, an examined life. We have to live a life in which we question things. And in the world that Guy Montag was beginning in the novel that we saw him in, he didn't question anything. So who caused Guy Montag to actually question? So when do we start seeing Guy Montag actually start questioning the reality? Like, when does he start understanding that, like, maybe I am in a cave? It's when he encounters. This says Clarisse. Clarisse, or as her name is actually translated, clarity. Her name means clarity. And Clarisse is supposed to represent someone who is young and passionate and enlightened in a world in which everyone seems to talk about meaningless jargon. The quote specifically says, no, not anything. They name a lot of cars or clothes or swimming pools. They have joke boxes on and the same jokes most of the time. You mean kind of like TikTok trends? It's almost as if the way that we actually communicate now isn't meaningful at all. It's almost as though our relationships have become parasocial as to actually social. And the idea of seeking true, meaningful communication has been completely lost in order for us to have disposable relationships that are shallow and easy to digest. Clarisse is always looking at the natural world, and when you read quotes about Clarisse, she's associated with the idea of autumn wind, the idea of things changing and becoming degraded, and her being part of that. She's associated with rustling leaves and things that Montag never noticed before. But wait a minute, why didn't he notice them before? Because he was constantly distracted by music, distracted by time, distracted by a never-ending war. Montag was constantly distracted, and plus, when you're having thoughts about this, it's difficult, it's painful. This type of thinking is hard. And most importantly, this type of thinking takes time. One of the quotes that we see in Fahrenheit 451 is the zipper displaces the button and we lose that philosophical hour. Time itself has been so fragmented in this world and in our own world that it seems as though there's no time to actually have conversations, real meaningful conversations. After all, when's the last time that you were really bothered about something important, about something real? So, who are the champions of free thought? What do we have to do in order to get out of this cave or this bubble or whatever you want to call it? In Fahrenheit 451, we have this particular scene where we see, "Play the man, Mr. Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust will never be put out." So that's a quote by Hugh Latimer. And Hugh Latimer was basically executed for speaking out to give the language of the Bible to the people. He wanted people to be able to interpret the Bible and themselves, and he was executed for it. And that was his last sentence before his execution, which makes sense because the woman who says it is quoting him as she's basically dying with her books. But obviously, we've got Guy Montag who doesn't want to die for books. He wants to live for truth. So how does one do that? That's essentially where we begin with Fahrenheit 451 with Guy Montag, is his journey through this world where you've got Captain Beatty who is arguing that there should be ignorance, that ignorance is necessary because people are too dumb to handle the truth. And then you've also got people like Clarisse who are like, you have to question things, you have to question the world around you. So I guess then the question is for you, where do you fall on this?